Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. Want to welcome everybody to the final edition of FSMA Fridays for 2018. Really excited to have you all join us here today, and actually very thankful. Good opportunity to thank all of you for joining us and continuing to grow this community over yet another successful year. We've got a nice special edition this month. We're going to not only have Dr. David Acheson join us, but also kind of take a little bit of a different format and more of a free-form conversation and interview and look back at 2018 and dig into what is to come in 2019. So welcome everybody. Sit back, relax, and we're gonna dive in because we got a lot of good stuff to cover. First and foremost, if you're new to FSMA Fridays, and we're having a lot of people still sign up and join us, and there may be some of you who are yanked into a conference room by some of your colleagues. We're hearing like group viewing parties, which is great. So, but if you're just checking us out for the first time, this has really been the longest standing industry update that was partnered with both SafetyChain and the Acheson Group over 5 years now, I believe, going on 6. So the idea here is to cultivate a community where we can share, all the FSMA related news, any recent changes or updates that are kind of going on month to month that are very topical and important. But it's also very nice in a sense that you get a chance to hear how the rules are being applied, what kind of strategies and trends are going on out there in the trenches. And I think the most valuable part of it is an opportunity not just to learn, but also ask questions of the Acheson Group experts that we bring in on individual topics each and every month. So we hope that you'll continue to join us. We've spoken behind the scenes and agreed it's still building momentum and still adding a lot of value, and that's the feedback we've been getting. So we're going to keep it going into 2019. So I guess that's our official announcement here. So we're excited to continue partnering with TAG on this and bringing it next year. And as I mentioned, this has been a long-standing partnership with the Acheson Group that we're extremely proud of and honored to be part of. And this partnership's growing. So not only, do we put this on together, they're also a really key part of a lot of our customers' strategies and planning. And but also, in addition, and probably the most exciting thing now is being able to merge that with what we both do. You might have heard about our new risk assessment that has been released, the Acheson Risk Assessment. And we had a very successful product launch a few weeks ago. And you'll be hearing more and more about that. So our partnership continues to grow, and we're really thankful for that. And I think it's going to add a lot more value to the market and hopefully this community here. So a few housekeeping items. One is, as you know, FSMA Fridays, I think one thing we all enjoy, it's pretty informal. So encourage you to ask questions. This is a good opportunity to fire away whatever is on your mind. And I will do my best to capture those. I'm anticipating a lot of them today, given Dr. Acheson's on the line and also kind of the broader topic. So I'll do my best to get to them. I did, prior to the call, check and confirm that he's okay with me letting you know if we don't get to all of them, that we'll make sure that he or someone on his team will certainly follow up with you offline. So more on that at the end here. You'll notice that only the panelists are displayed. So if you have some questions not getting broadcast to everybody, it'll come in to myself and I'll monitor those. And we are recording this. If you weren't aware, we have a really great library of all the FSMA Fridays, both on our website at SafetyChain.com, or you can just go over to YouTube and look up FSMA Friday, and we've got the entire library there. So you can always check it out, but we will be passing along this link and posting it to YouTube within the next week or so. And last but not least, we all use these meeting and webinar tools every day, so you guys know the drill. But if you do have an audio issue, one option is just hop over to the other option. If you're on phone, go to the web, and vice versa. If that doesn't work, the old log out and log in. I know that sounds pretty complicated, but it's usually the trick that works. So in terms of what we're in store for today, we'll touch real quickly on anything recent in the news. But at a broader level, today's really all about looking back at 2018 and all the things that were going on, and also talking a little bit about what's to come for 2019, and of course, field the questions that you all have. So again, those questions, you have a little question box on the right-hand side. and you can fire those away to me here. So without further ado, I want to bring in the man of the hour, Dr. David Acheson. He's the CEO and president at the Acheson Group. I'm sure all of you are very familiar with him, his work, and the work that his team does. But if for some reason you're not, he's got over 30 years of industry experience, including serving as the former Associate Commissioner for Foods at the FDA and also the Chief Medical Officer at the USDA Food Safety Inspection Service, amongst a very impressive resume. But with that, I'll introduce you. So, David, can you hear us okay?
I can, Brian. No, thank you very much, and thank you to everybody who's joined us today.
Excellent. Well, good. Well, we're gonna just dig right in because I love this free form format when we get to have you on and just kind of have a conversation. So, since we last got together, there's always a lot in the news. Is there anything kind of top of mind that's being discussed in your office or with your customers right now, just since we last met 3-4 weeks ago?
Well, thanks, Brian. No, it's interesting as we look at, and you reminded me how long we've been doing FSMA Fridays and the evolution of the FSMA news, and it's like a little scary we've been going so long, but great that we had so many people join us today, given that it's a few days before Christmas, and appreciate you all putting a little bit of FSMA in front of your Christmas shopping. So anyway, realistically, the FDA is just continuing to push out guidances bit by bit. We'll talk about those in just a sec. I think with FSMA news, what we're seeing more is how is FDA moving from education to enforcement, but we'll get into that a little bit as to what to expect in 2019. Other much bigger issue questions are starting to pop out as food safety evolves into whole other arenas, and I know this is not supposed to be a cannabis-related call, but I'd be remiss if I didn't sort of just pop that out there with changes in the Farm Bill and shifted in scheduling of hemp-related products. And interestingly, questions we're starting to get at TAG about are cannabinoids and edibles with CBD in them going to be, and even THC possibly going to be regulated under FSMA. So not exactly FSMA related, Brian, but whole other spectrums opening up in this regulatory space. But that's nothing really juicy in the last month from FDA on FSMA specifically.
Okay. All right. Well, that's good. And the cannabis was actually one of the things I had on my list because it's coming up for us as well. So it might be interesting to touch on that towards the end. But so looking at 2018, you posed an interesting concept there about that shift that's happening in the regulatory environment. So what are you seeing this past year, right? As you've been out there with your different customers and whether it's the focus or the shift you've been talking about.
Yeah, this is always a question of what's top of mind, what are people focusing on, what's the industry worried about, and one of the things that we do on an annual basis at TAG is look over all of the newsletters that we've put out and see, what gets the most traction, what is it that people are looking at in terms of concerns and risks. And, it's a couple of old chestnuts that have emerged. And, one of them that continues to pop up constantly, and it is our number one, is the whole question of ready to eat. What is a ready to eat food? Why is it important? And I would say in 2018, this has continued to be a major focus of the Food and Drug Administration. We've seen whole genome sequencing accelerate in terms of its use. We've seen, obviously, lots of recalls that have been linked to the use of that modern genetic technology, how it's being leveraged at the public health level, how it's being leveraged at the regulatory level. So number one on that continues to be for 2018 is the whole ready to eat. And I think everyone in the industry asking themselves that really tough question, is, am I making a ready-to-eat food? And moving into this, if you're asking yourself that question and you say, well, I don't think I am, then ask yourself the tough question: is, are consumers using my product as a ready-to-eat food, even though that's not what I intended it for? Are consumers using my product as a ready-to-eat food, even though I've got cooking instructions on it? Those are some difficult questions for the industry to I think accept. But that's the regulatory bar. That's what industry is expected to be thinking about: is foreseeable use of the food, and this sort of shift into the FDA saying, well, you as the industry, you need to know what consumers may be doing with your food. And I think we have to be realistic there as well. Anybody could do anything with the food. The point is moving in that direction big time. So ready to eat absolutely is still top of the tree. Looking at environmental control programs, etc. So that's been the big focus. Other areas, obviously, which I think I want to talk about anyway, is produce, the role of the produce rule, those types of things, which we'll get into. But just as a little call out on that, I think one of the big hits in 2018 was Cyclospora. We've seen that bug pop up on a regular basis over the last several years in the summer, leading to outbreaks. And I think most people in the food industry have sort of said, "Oh, this is a bug that comes in from the south of the border. It happens going way back to Guatemalan raspberries years ago." But it was a wake-up call for me this year to see Cyclospora popping up in domestically grown produce. So that's another big issue. And I think that the regulatory focus in 2018, absolutely, as we all know, when we will get more into this in a sec, was produce. So there's a couple of little highlights from 2018, Brian.
Very good, excellent. So let's start digging into a little bit around 2019 and what you think the focus will be there. And you and I were talking a little bit about this earlier, about this concept of advisories becoming so broad, right, covering an entire commodity, right? So is that going to become the norm? And I'm sure that makes for a pretty exciting day around the office for you and your customers. And what are you thinking about for this coming year?
Well, I think, where will the regulatory focus be? I think FDA is going to have no choice but to put a lot of focus on fresh produce. Not a new problem, not a new issue, but we have to remember is like what drives FDA, what drives them to focus in certain key areas, and the answer is clearly public health. But it's also they are put under political pressure. No surprise to anybody there. You've got Congress screaming at them. You've got consumer groups getting at them. So while first and foremost they are focused on protecting the public and focused on public health issues, they are under pressure to do things and move things forward. Again, bit of a produce-centric comment is. FSMA has got provisions in the regulations and in the statutes for increased water testing. FDA is under a lot of pressure to move that forward. They've sort of kicked the can down the road, saying, as I think they should have, is we need to base regulations on science and what it's going to tell us. Is what's the right level of testing of water that's being used on produce, but there is a lot of pressure to drive that to a point of completion and put requirements in place. So I think that we're going to see a significant produce focus in 2019. Linked to that, we are going to see ready-to-eat focus. I've already said that. That is not going to slow down. I think FDA is getting a lot of traction out of that. And another area that the agency is focused on and just recently published some data is they continue to test products at retail of areas where they perceive to be high risk. And spices continue to be high on the FDA's radar screen. So if you are using sourcing spices, which obviously a lot of people are, that's something when you're looking at your supply chain risk control, and we start to see FSMA getting more teeth and FDA inspections looking at your food safety plan. Remember, if you're a registered firm, you need to have a supplier approval program in place, starting to look very, very hard at that in terms of those risks, especially with regard to spices. On that note, on the supplier approval programs, we've talked multiple times before, is a GFSI audit enough for suppliers? And I've always taken the approach that absent any further information from FDA, it is. If you've got a GFSI audit of your supplier and you've reviewed that audit, then you're good. I'm starting to see a little pushback from the FDA around, is a GFSI audit just in and of itself enough? Some pushback to say, well, have you made sure that the supplier, is controlling the risk that you have identified in your food safety plan as the one that needs to be controlled? Does the audit specifically cover that? And you need to be able to answer in the affirmative. It's like, yeah, we've checked and we've identified salmonella as a risk in this product that the supplier is controlling, and the process controls or the environmental control program in the supplier. So another little area of focus for 2019. I think we'll continue to see focus on allergens. We'll continue to see increased focus on foreign supplier verification programs, which kind of links into what I just said for 2018 going into 19 for FSMA centric. One key thing to mention for 2019 is the regulatory requirement for the food defense or intentional adulteration rule is going to kick in 2019. That will be July, when companies will need to be compliant with that rule. That's clearly a deadline that we have to focus on and we have to pay attention to. I don't see that being as a huge regulatory focus, just based on the fact that food defense, it's important to have it. I could see inspectors asking to see your food defense plan, but from a public health perspective, that's going to be a key area. So maybe that's some high level stuff for 2019, Brian, in terms of where to focus. But to the second part of your question here, will commodity advisories become the norm?
Yeah.
I think that's the where I'm thinking there is obviously in relation to romaine lettuce. The FDA, just before Thanksgiving, for those of you, I think nobody on this call isn't fully aware of this, but let me state the obvious, is basically FDA came out with a statement saying to the United States, do not eat romaine lettuce. Doesn't matter where it came from, doesn't matter if it's chopped, if it's whole head, it doesn't matter what it is, romaine hearts, don't eat the lettuce. The last time the FDA did that was in 2006, in which the agency put out a message of do not eat spinach. That was a bit more of an evolving message as an outbreak was unfolding. This year it was a just total don't eat romaine lettuce.
Right.
And I think one has to ask oneself, is that a unique situation? Is that something that the FDA is going to use as a tool to drive change? And I don't know the answer to that, but if we ask why did the FDA do this, it was because, in my belief, and I haven't asked the FDA that, and even if I did, I'm not sure I'd get an answer. But my belief
Sure.
is that this was outbreak number 3 or outbreak number 4 that we'd had in 12 months or so, linked to a specific commodity, in this case, romaine lettuce. We were seeing the beginnings of an outbreak, 30 at the time, 30 to 40 something cases. Obviously, not nearly as severe as some of the other outbreaks, and the FDA just said, we're not taking the risk. E. coli 0157 is a deadly pathogen. This one is going to go the way of all the others. We're going to have more cases. We need to take a very affirmative, strong, recommended action to warn the consumers away from a commodity. And I think it worked. I think it worked. Obviously, there were more cases, likely ones that were already exposed at the time, but it worked. So the FDA has got a tool here which they can clearly use. And how do we deal with that as an industry? If I was sitting in FDA's shoes, I'd be thinking, "Ooh, that worked. Next time there's one of these, we might do that again."
Sure.
So to me, the answer is obviously for any industry, try to make sure that the controls are in place so that these things don't happen. But heck, we're dealing with food, especially produce. It isn't risk-free. We minimize it to the extent that we can. Where I see a very important focus for the industry going forward is traceability systems. Part of the challenge here is when we start to get illnesses, we have to be able to put bookends around the implicated product. We have to be able to very quickly say, this is where the problem started, this is where it ends, these are the lot codes that are implicated, and more importantly, these are all the lot codes and growers and distributors and manufacturers that are not implicated. That only happens with good record keeping and good traceability systems.
Right.
I'll get on a soapbox one more second, Brian, if I may, and say, but this is not just an industry issue. When it takes the government 3 to 4 weeks between somebody getting sick to the point at which they've got the whole genome sequencing and go to the restaurant or the retailer and say, where did you get that lettuce from? Where did you get those tomatoes from? Where did you get those peppers from? That is a real problem when you have a commodity that's only got a 2 to 3 week shelf life. So this is a fix at multiple levels, but we got to go there because I think this commodity advisory hit is proven to be effective, and I fear it'll get used again. So I'm sorry that was such a long-winded answer, but the 2019 and the commodity advisories are kind of a hot topic, I think, going forward.
They sure are. No, I'm glad you did. You stay on that soapbox because we believe the same, and that we're really committed to trying to help our customers with the same thing, right? Arming them with that data and getting that information to the right people faster can protect a lot of people, consumers, our customers, their customers. So it is an important topic, and I think that the timing of it, it made it a conversation piece. I mean, across Thanksgiving dinner tables and obviously in our industry, but everyone was talking about it. So I appreciate you going into depth there. You did touch on this real briefly. I didn't know if you want to add anything else. And we also did a short session on this on one of our FSMA Fridays. But it is coming into play, as you mentioned, and it's top of mind as they're getting ready. Do you see any impact or anything your clients are doing differently to prepare, or are they just kind of more attention to detail here, or any recommendations around the intentional adulteration rule?
Yeah, no, absolutely, and I did touch on it, but to go into a little bit more depth, there are very clear requirements for manufacturers that have over $10 million of business. It really is applying to bigger companies. If you have less than $10 million in annual revenues, then this rule really doesn't apply to you. But if you're above that 10 million cutoff, then it is important that you've put together a food defense plan. My advice to clients on this one is look at the language in the rule and specifically focus on a couple of factors. Number one is this. The strategies you put in place to be compliant with this rule is to mitigate /prevent deliberate / intentional. So it's all about somebody deliberately doing something, and that something has to have widespread public health impact. So if you don't get all bogged down in looking at possible scenarios which could impact a very small amount of product, isn't going to impact many people. It really is a combination of the deliberate and the high impact. It's those two things. And a lot of our clients get bogged down. Well, somebody could do that to a finished product.
Sure.
And before you know it, you start to get horribly in the weeds of well, this could happen and that could happen, and you start to say, well, can we mitigate this and can we mitigate that? You can, but you'll spend an awful lot of money on it, and I don't think you need to do that for regulatory purposes. The FDA's put out some good guidance documents on this already. I think there'll be more to come. So do look at those. And as everything, with folks on these webinars, if you'd like to have a chat with somebody at TAG about the best approach or whether the approach you're taking seems like the right one, then do feel free to do that. But this is an important box to check because it's a compliance requirement. So don't ignore it, but don't go nuts over it either. I think there's solutions that are workable.
Yeah, that's helpful feedback. I could see that happening for sure. So getting back to produce, I know we touched on this a little bit a moment ago, but as we look forward to 2019 and the produce industry, what other challenges are you seeing around that? You talked a little bit about traceability and the potential broader commodity announcements. So what are you thinking?
Right. What I'm thinking on produce is whenever we have a produce outbreak, it more likely than not the problem has occurred at the grower end. I mean, historically that's what we've learned, is that a produce item has been contaminated at farm level, more likely than not. Obviously, when you chop produce, you pack it, you reprocess it, you handle it, you can temperature abuse it, you can do things to it. So everybody in the supply chain has a role to play, but usually the blame gets pointed back at the grower, and certainly as I talked about the romaine outbreaks, it's gone back towards the grower as being the primary cause of the problem, whether it was canal water in Arizona that was responsible, and now we're starting to see with this most recent one that it was possibly again going back to water source as being a probable cause of the outbreak. It's very easy for us all to say, oh, it's a grower problem. Oh, it's a grower problem. And the reality is the growers probably have the biggest responsibility for the preventive side of produce. But as I was alluding to, Brian, I think the solution here is all the way down the supply chain. Because if retailers and restaurants are not tracking what it is they're selling to consumers, and I mean tracking on a lot level, a use by level, date codes, whatever information is, if you're not capturing that, and the FDA comes in and wants to know, well, David Acheson got sick from E. coli, and he says he ate at your restaurant. What lettuce were you serving a week last Tuesday? And you're going to look at yourself and say, well, I don't know. It could have been from one of 5 suppliers. It could have been a variety of lot codes. And so you immediately have this big swath of possible issues, and then they go into another restaurant where Brian Sharp ate and he got sick, and they wind up with another list. So while we want to put the burden on the grower, my belief here is that this has got to be a top to bottom solution to managing the produce industry, and it certainly is not just a grower issue. That's point number one. Point number two, and it's 2 of 2, is that there will always be growers who say, I know best. I don't want regulators in my place. Don't tell me what to do. Farmers traditionally have been, we know better than anybody else. And they do about many, 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 many things. But this is not just food safety risk. This is reputational risk. It's product tracking. It's looking at modern science. It's looking at whole genome sequencing. And I think it's going to be a massively big lift to get every little grower up to speed with where they need to be, linking into these traceability systems and the broader approach. My view of this, and it may be a little bit of an extreme one, is we need key leaders from the grower end through processors, through distributors, through retailers and food service to step up to the plate and say, we're going to build a system here that really works. And if you don't want to be on this, then that's your choice. But that will allow these leaders to be able to very quickly exclude themselves from problems. Because we've always tried to get everybody on board. And the California Leafy Greens Agreement, which popped up in following some of the spinach issues 10 years ago, has done a great job. But there are still people who say, "Oh, I don't believe in that. I don't need to do that." And that drags the whole industry down. And then we get these commodity advisories. So the produce industry has to look very, very hard at, is it one size fits all? Yeah, in theory, but in reality, no. We've got to have leaders here to drive it forward. So I'm sorry for the produce industry. You do have challenges, but I think they're solvable.
Yeah, no, I think your suggestion there is very warranted and something we all got to support too, right? From technology side, from your side as a consultant, it's going to take all of us to help.
Absolutely.
We talked a little bit during the year about suppliers and co-mans and some of the risks there. Anything that you wanted to touch on that either you're seeing or kind of foresee being important to have an eye on in 2019?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I've already touched on supply chain risk control. I think that will continue to be a big FSMA focus. It's absolutely a brand reputation issue. We've seen a number of fairly significant recalls where co-manufacturers have been responsible. From a pure regulatory perspective, it's the co-man that carries the can on that. It's the co-man that has to be compliant with federal and state regulations. I get that, but it's aside from the compliance issue and who gets the 483 if you're FDA regulated. It's your brand that gets whacked. And I've seen, this is not a new phenomenon, but I'm really starting to push the companies we work with is, do you really know what's going on in your co-mans as much as you should be? And, the answer is usually no. And so my recommendation is, you've got your own place in order, devote some resources to the co-mans. And truly make sure, even though they say, well, we're only making product for you on one line, and they've got 6 other lines in the plant, you need insight as to what's going on into those other 6 lines, because your line may not have had any hits for an environmental pathogen, but if there's listeria over all the other 5 lines and just not your line, you sure as heck want to know about that.
No doubt.
So that's a relatively superficial answer to the question, and so we're increasingly looking at how do we work with our clients to manage co-man risk, and I think everybody accepts that it's a risk and they know it's a risk, but are you really ask yourself, am I stepping up to the plate on that one? Do I have as good a handle on my co-man risk as I should? And I, as I say, from our experience, most companies, if they're honest with themselves, say, no, we need to tighten that up. So I'd put that as a high priority for a look-see in 2019.
Very, very good. Yeah, we're seeing some really creative, proactive ideas around that using technology too. So I'm excited to see how that continues to evolve for sure. So. Yep. So I guess as we kind of wrap things up here, just talking about the strategy, right? And this is what you and your team really do every day for your customers. So as we're looking forward and just talking about the strategy around food safety, what's on top of your list for this coming year?
Yeah, well, as always, Brian, I think knowing where your vulnerabilities are and being open and honest about it is a key part. You may not want to share that with anybody outside the room or outside your company, but number one, know where your gaps are. whether it's internal, whether it's supply chain. Just be really honest with yourself, and know where you're struggling. Number two, track what's going on. Don't have your head in the sand. Look at what the FDA is saying. That's part of why we do these FSMA Fridays, and I think that's part of why we continue to have people join us. Is it helps to share experiences and talk about these things. We are a food community, big time, and what hits one of us hits all of us, and obviously the commodity size advisories is a unfortunate and harsh reminder of all of that. We're all in this together. So, I think sharing learnings, easy to say food safety is non-competitive, and it basically is. So I think it is important that we continue to share thoughts and share strategies, and more importantly, share solutions. And we could definitely do that. So keep your eyes on the regulatory thinking, keep your eyes on the regulatory focus. Ready to eat, supply chains, co-mans are some of the areas that we've touched on, which are going to continue to be major focus going forward.
Excellent, and we're big believers in that community as well, and want to continue to support all of you how we can. And Dr. Acheson, we're just really grateful to have you and your team continue to be part of this. I think it's added a ton of value. I can't tell you, as we travel and go to trade shows or even our on-sites with customers, and they talk about FSMA Fridays, it's almost a cult following at this point. So it's been really cool to see this grow, and we're really appreciative that you've been one of the leaders to get out there and create this. So thank you for all the time and effort you put into this community here. So we've got a couple of questions. I know we're at the bottom of the hour here, so what do you think? You up for a couple of quick ones, or
sure.
Shall we go and wrap it up? So
absolutely. No, we're sensitive to people's time, but if there's a couple of quickies, we'll try and knock them out.
Yeah, sounds good. So we'll respect everyone's time if you need to hop off. For those that want a little overtime, we'll touch on a couple specifics here. One goes back to your first point about ready-to-eat foods, and the question is around classification for those and labeling. Is it restricted to consumer packaged good items, or does it encompass ingredients?
I would include it for ingredients, and this gets more about to supplier control. If you're selling an ingredient to a customer and it's a business-to-business transaction, I think it's important that you communicate to that customer if you have or have not controlled risks. More importantly, if you haven't. And there is actually a FSMA requirement to do that, because you should have analyzed the risks in that product and then communicate to your customer that you have not controlled it for pathogen risks or whatever it may be. So I think that is important. And you cannot control what your customer is going to do with it. That's for sure. So I believe that communication is really critical. And you may be selling to a customer who you believe is going to do one thing with it, and unbeknownst to you, and they have no need or reason or right to have to tell you, is they're going to go off do something else with it, which could include reselling it. And you're selling it as a non-ready to eat, and your customer then goes to sell it to somebody else, and it becomes a ready to eat, and you need to make sure you've got your bases covered to say, well, I sold you this contractually as a not ready to eat product. And what you do with it is up to you, but don't come back and blame me if somebody then has a problem with it.
Right. Okay, good. Question about when we're talking a little bit about oversight at the FDA. The question is, do you anticipate any increased auditing or oversight in alcohol from the FDA?
No, I don't. Not in alcohol. The FDA really doesn't do much auditing in alcohol as it is. It's the TTB that really does that. But FDA gets involved in alcohol when there's a public health risk issue. So if there's glass in bottles of alcohol or there's chemical residues, then the FDA does get involved, and TTB and FDA work closely on that. And we've worked with clients who are in that space, who totally understand the alcohol regulations but struggle with the FDA ones. I don't see increased focus on that. To go full circle here, Brian, and we haven't talked about cannabis at all, but there's if folk will remember that at one point we started to see beverages coming on the market with caffeine and alcohol in them. FDA banned those. Just very, very recently, I think within the last few days, Canada has come out with its regs on edibles, and have basically said a cannabis alcohol mix is not allowed. So I think that I've gone off base on the answer to the question, but no, I don't see increased inspections in that area of alcohol.
Yeah, no, I think the cannabis one will be an interesting topic perhaps for FSMA Friday this coming year, because there's a lot of talk about, a lot of change as well coming. So yeah, very good. Well, we'll wrap it up at that. For those of you that are not part of it, as you hop off the webinar here, I encourage you to go over to LinkedIn real quick and join our FSMA Fridays group. We post some of the continuing questions, keep the conversation going, and as David alluded to, this is one of the areas we like to engage with our communities. So definitely encourage you to join us over there. And the other go-to move is definitely check out. In fact, they got a beautiful new website over at achesongroup.com. We couldn't recommend enough what David had suggested. If you have questions, you're not sure how to apply some of these new regulations, or you're just looking to make improvements to your food safety plans, just can't say enough about the work that he and his team do out there for clients every day. So highly recommend as you're considering your plans for next year to engage them and get them on the phone. The other thing I'd also recommend is they have a ton of great resources on their website. And the newsletter that he mentioned earlier is an absolute must-have. So definitely check that out. And on the technology side, we certainly would love to be part of that conversation as you're looking to find ways to make all of this a little bit faster, easier, and smarter. We talked a lot about some of this traceability and just applying all of these different techniques and strategies. We can help do that a lot better with our food quality management system. We've got some exciting stuff, including that new risk assessment tool. And if you haven't seen it, we've got some information on our website over at SafetyChain.com. And that's something we're very, very excited about, that partnership with TAG. Last but not least, we'll get you out the recording here and encourage you to continue connecting with us on some of our other training webinars and demo days. In fact, we have one of the TAG consultants joining us in January to dig in on a topic for our training series. So keep an eye out for that coming soon. And as I mentioned, the TAG newsletter is a must read. So thank you again for joining us. Dr. Acheson, thank you so much just for the continued partnership and for being here today during what is always a busy time of year for you. So thank you, sir.
You're welcome, Brian. Thank you for inviting me, and thanks to everybody who, as I said, gave up that Christmas shopping to join us.
Absolutely. And thank you all for joining us and continue to make this a really great series, and more to come starting on January 25th. We wish you all a very wonderful holiday and safe holiday season, and we'll see you next year. Thanks, everybody.